They say hindsight is 20/20, but I'd argue it's more like that smug friend who shows up late to the party just to say, "Told you so." That's how it felt when everything unraveled. Looking back now, the clues were laid out like traffic cones on a small-town parade route, bright, obvious, and inconveniently placed. But back then, I was too busy tightening bolts and fixing things to notice that my marriage was running on fumes. Let me take you to a Tuesday afternoon in mid-October. Cheryl had just asked me to fix the passenger side door on her 2014 Nissan Altima, said it was sticking. Now, that car has seen more parking lots than a high school cigarette break, so I figured a little wear and tear was natural. Still, I went at it with my usual sense of purpose, screwdriver in hand, mild irritation in chest. I wasn't annoyed at her, more at the fact that things kept breaking lately. The toaster, the dishwasher, the coffee maker. Cheryl's interest in me. Anyway, I popped off the door panel with the kind of finesse that only a man with 2 decades of mechanical intuition and no formal training can deliver. I'd gotten pretty good at fixing things people didn't care to maintain. The metaphor didn't hit me at the time. Would have been poetic if it had, but no. Keith Henderson doesn't get poetic until everything's already burned to the ground. I didn't find anything strange in the door, no secret notes, no lipstick-stained napkin with a name like Derek scribbled in cursive. Just a candy wrapper jammed in the locking mechanism and a button that needed realigning. It was done in 20 minutes. Cheryl thanked me with a smile that stopped a few inches short of genuine and returned to her crossword puzzle like we hadn't shared a bed for the last 7 years. Fun fact, Cheryl never finishes the crossword. She just likes circling the clues she thinks she knows. And I went back to the garage, which, by then, had become less of a workspace and more of a refuge. My tools didn't roll their eyes. My workbench didn't check out emotionally after dinner. The shelves didn't disappear for 3-hour grocery runs and come back with only celery and a candle. The thing that kicked off the unraveling, officially, anyway, wasn't a text or a call or lipstick on a collar. No, it was a fire pit. Or rather, the planning of one. We'd been invited to this autumn bonfire social by our neighbors across the street, Jeff and Melanie Kent. They host these things like clockwork. Hot cider, acoustic guitar, flannel shirts pretending to be personality. I didn't want to go, but Cheryl insisted. Said we needed to connect with the community, which was code for, I want to show off my new boots and pretend we still like each other in public. That Saturday night, I put on a sweater that hadn't seen daylight since Obama's second term and walked over with Cheryl, who looked amazing, but in that calculated, careful way. Like her outfit had been laid out for someone else's eyes. Not that I noticed right away. I was too busy dodging Jeff's attempts to explain kombucha. The party was just as expected. Crackling fire, over-ambitious cheese platters, a guy named Lance playing Wonderwall on a 12-string. Cheryl drifted off within minutes, claiming she saw someone from her Pilates class. I let her go, figuring the chips and guac could use my company more than she could. Now, here's where things get a little Shakespearean. At some point in the night, Melanie Kent, our delightful, oversharing hostess, cornered me near the cider station. She leaned in with that look women get when they've had one too many pumpkin alesh and are about to change someone's life, whether they want it or not. I saw Cheryl at the antique fair last weekend, she said, as if this were the setup to a harmless anecdote. I nodded politely, waiting for a punchline involving overpriced chairs. She was with someone, Melanie continued, smiling a little too tightly. Tall, salt and pepper hair. I assumed it was you until he kissed her shoulder. I remember blinking a few times, trying to download that sentence into my brain. It wasn't computing. She kissed her what now? Shoulder, Melanie repeated, like it was just a weather report. In the open, too. Broad daylight. I mean, maybe you're into that kind of thing and no judgment at all, but I just thought, well, you're so hands-on, you know? Fixing stuff and all. Didn't seem like something you'd outsource. I could have walked away. I could have laughed. I could have assumed Melanie was mistaken, drunk, or bored. But something about the way she said it, light, casual, like she was commenting on the rising price of arugula, made it land with a dull thud in the pit of my stomach. So I did what any self-respecting husband would do. I nodded, thanked her for the information like she'd just offered me a coupon, and immediately excused myself to go sit by the fire and silently panic. Cheryl returned 20 minutes later, cheeks flushed, smelling like applewood and mystery. She plopped down beside me, and linked her arm through mine like nothing in the world was wrong. And that's when I realized she didn't know I knew. Not yet. I smiled. Not out of affection, but calculation. Because the game had changed. And if I was going to find out the truth, I'd need to play along a little longer. There's an art to pretending everything's fine while your brain rewires itself in the background. I leaned into that art like it was the only thing holding me together. And you know what? That was the last time Cheryl ever kissed my cheek without wondering if I was onto her. Now, if you're expecting me to have flipped a table or stormed off into the night to drown my sorrows in bourbon and bad karaoke, you don't know Keith Henderson. I don't do drama. I do plans. And I had one forming before Cheryl even finished her second cider. You'll hear about it soon enough. But first, let me tell you how I set the stage. If you're expecting fireworks, some big blowout, or me chasing Cheryl through the neighborhood while waving a lawn ornament, sorry to disappoint. That's not how this went down. Cheryl's secrets weren't dramatic. They were quiet, efficient, and scheduled like everything else in her life, right between her bi-weekly eyebrow threading and whatever she pretended to do at the co-op on Thursdays. But the thing about secrets is they have a shelf life. And Cheryl? Well, hers were starting to smell. After the bonfire, otherwise known as the night of the shoulder revelation, I didn't rush into anything. Keith Henderson does not leap. Keith observes, documents, and makes spreadsheets with color-coded tabs. Not literally. I hate Excel, but mentally? Oh, I was borderline forensic. So I started my research. Step 1. Reintroduce myself to Cheryl's calendar. The one she left open on the kitchen counter every Sunday night. Because apparently privacy wasn't necessary when you're this smug. You'd think if someone was juggling a double life, they'd have at least learned to password protect their day planner. But no, Cheryl had all the discretion of a raffle drawing. And there it was, sandwiched between dry cleaner and Pilates, don't skip this time, a name I hadn't seen before. Dale, meet 3:30. Now, I'm not saying Dale automatically means guy Cheryl's having coffee and whispers with, but come on. No last name, no reason, no location, just Dale, meet 3:30. Like he was some recurring plot line she was trying to keep under the radar, but didn't want to fully forget. I didn't react. Not externally. Internally, I gave a standing ovation to Melanie Kent for setting this snowball rolling. Over the next week, Dale kept popping up, sometimes twice a week. Once she even underlined it, as if she wanted to remind herself he was important. I resisted the urge to Google, what kind of name is Dale, just to get mad at his parents. Instead, I decided to test a theory. That Thursday morning, Cheryl casually mentioned she'd be going to the farmer's market. I don't know who she thought she was fooling. Cheryl wouldn't know a farm if it showed up and handed her a basket of beets. Still, I nodded, as if I truly believed she was off to inspect artisanal rutabagas. She left at 3:10. Our charming little farmer's market is a full 12 minutes away. I checked the clock, waited, and at exactly 3:29, I pulled into the parking lot of a strip mall not far from the post office. And there she was. Now, I'll be clear, I didn't follow her. I simply anticipated. Cheryl operates on a predictable kind of efficiency that makes the Apple Genius bar look disorganized. She doesn't do surprises. So of course she'd park 2 rows away from where she thought no one would recognize her. I parked, ducked, and observed. A sedan pulled in. Neutral. Forgettable. One of those cars that says, I gave up on excitement and settled for reliability. Out stepped Dale. Now I don't know what I expected. A guy in a leather jacket? Sunglasses? Maybe a fake name and a mysterious scar? Nope. Dale wore khakis. Tan ones. And a tucked-in polo like he'd just walked off a golf course where he didn't even play. Just watched and made passive-aggressive comments about people's swings. Cheryl smiled in that overly pleasant way she used for bank tellers and people who complimented her on Facebook. Then she hugged him. Not the long-lost cousin hug. Not the you're taller than I remember hug. No, this was the kind of hug that involved swaying. Like they were slow dancing to music only they could hear. I stayed until they walked into the coffee shop next to the pharmacy. And I know what you're thinking. Keith, why didn't you go in? Order a latte and pull up a chair like a sitcom neighbor with popcorn? Because I wasn't ready. Because I wanted more than just a hug and some suspicious calendar notes. So I waited. And the universe, as it turns out, has a sense of humor. The next clue came not from Cheryl, but from our printer. Specifically, the one she kept in her home office, which she insisted I never touch because I load the paper wrong and mash the buttons like I'm trying to win a prize. But that Tuesday, the thing jammed and screamed like it was trying to alert the authorities. I opened the tray. There, neatly folded and stuck under a printhead, was what I can only describe as a professionally designed thank you card, addressed to someone named Dale R. Curiosity got the best of me. I opened it. Inside was a message that nearly made me laugh out loud. Dale, thank you for your continued support. Your insight and, well, everything have meant more than I can say. I hope this next chapter is everything you hoped for. No signature, just a little heart. Because apparently Cheryl believes in subtlety about as much as she believes in gluten. Now, I could have confronted her right then, waved the card in her face, and made a dramatic exit into the driveway. But again, Keith doesn't do impulsive. He builds. So, I started creating what I call the board. Not a real board, mind you. I'm not unhinged. Just a small drawer in my tool chest where I started collecting the bits. The card. A printed copy of her calendar entry. A receipt I later found in her coat pocket from the same coffee shop. 2 drinks, 1 muffin, and a tip that suggested enthusiasm. And then came the business cards. I found those during closet maintenance, which is what Cheryl calls it when she tells me to rotate the hangers so everything gets to breathe. Apparently cardigans are now living organisms. Anyway, tucked in the pocket of a beige trench coat she hadn't worn since the spring was a stack of 3 cards. Same name. Dale Rubin, Urban Garden Design. I'd seen some red flags in my day, but Urban Garden Design was a whole new kind of flag. Who even is this guy? Does he mulch for a living? Is that code for something? Is she planning to run off and plant native grasses in someone else's backyard? I didn't ask. I waited. And Cheryl, bless her organized little soul, made it easy. One evening, out of nowhere, she asked if I could attend a town meeting in her place. Said she had a headache and didn't want to sit through another discussion about stop signs near the elementary school. I said sure, because I'm a team player. But instead of going, I stayed home. And Cheryl? Cheryl left the house dressed like she was going to a meet and greet for a mayoral candidate who only speaks in yoga poses. She even wore the coat with the cards. I gave her a 20-minute head start. Then I walked to the corner store and saw it, the same sedan from before. Parked. Cheryl inside. And Dale. Talking. Smiling. Not kissing, not touching. Just being very close. Like 2 people planning something big. Something that didn't include me. When she got home 2 hours later, she looked tired. Not the, I just had a stressful meeting, kind of tired. The I've been acting all day kind. She microwaved a cup of tea, sat down, and asked if I thought we needed to replace the window blinds in the guest room. I nodded, and I knew exactly what to do next. Because the thing about Cheryl is, she doesn't know I know. And the thing about Keith? He's got time. When I was younger, my mother used to say, Keith, don't start nothing you can't finish. Solid advice, though back then she mostly meant Legos and arguments with my uncle about yard lines. Still, it stuck. So when I decided I wasn't going to just roll over and let Cheryl keep choreographing her community theater version of a marriage, I knew I had to follow through. Not with yelling, not with drama, not even with accusations. No, I was going to get her to dig her own hole, one painfully normal day at a time. I started with minor adjustments. Cheryl's biggest weakness, besides men with landscaping-themed job titles, is her need to control a narrative. You want to disrupt Cheryl? Don't fight her. Don't question her. Just confuse her enough that she starts narrating things that don't need narrating. First move, laundry sabotage. Now, don't get excited. I didn't shrink her clothes or dye anything pink. I'm not 12. I simply started doing it. Without being asked. Without making a show of it. Just folded shirts, aligned socks. Put her weird yoga pants into little fabric squares. First few times, she said nothing. Then one day, while we were brushing our teeth in silence, she said, "Did you use the low spin setting on the machine?" I replied, "Of course. I treat polyester with the dignity it deserves." She stared at me like I'd told her I joined a barbershop quartet. But she smiled, then walked off like she wasn't slightly bothered. Next, I installed a whiteboard in the garage. Project planning, I called it. On it, I listed things I was working on. Most of them were fake. Fix gutter, north side. Refinish nightstand. Check insulation, R-value. Cheryl came out one afternoon while I was pretending to measure a stud with a pencil behind my ear and asked, "What's the insulation R-value thing about?" "Oh, Just something I've been reading about, I said, as if it were a Netflix recommendation. You wouldn't believe how inefficient this place really is. She nodded slowly, like I'd just claimed I spoke fluent Norwegian. Then she walked back inside and stared at her phone for a solid 7 minutes. The whiteboard made her nervous, I could tell. I updated it daily. Not because I needed to, but because Cheryl hates ambiguity more than she hates parallel parking. Ambiguity makes her think there's a conversation happening she isn't part of. And that was the goal. 3 days later, she started asking questions. Are you thinking about renovating something? Maybe, I said, just tossing around ideas. For what? Just stuff. And that was it. Just stuff. Cheryl's least favorite phrase in the English language. I also started hanging around the co-op. Not because I care about locally sourced lentils, but because I wanted to learn how Cheryl used it as an alibi. Turns out, the place is run by a guy named Calvin who wears socks with avocados on them and talks like his mouth is full of granola. He also hasn't seen Cheryl in weeks. She still a member? I asked. Calvin squinted at me. Yeah, she paid for the year. Cool, I said, and bought a $7 jar of mustard just to seem normal. I didn't tell Cheryl I'd been there. I didn't have to. That kind of information leaks slowly. The receipt left on the counter. A weirdly specific comment about the mustard. Cheryl's eyes narrowing slightly when I mentioned that Calvin looked like he sleeps in a hammock made of recycled tires. She didn't ask if I went. She didn't mention the co-op again for 2 weeks. And then, my favorite part. She slipped. It happened on a Monday, which felt appropriate. Mondays are when everyone tries to reboot their lives. Cheryl came into the kitchen wearing that expression she gets when she's about to pretend something isn't happening. Like when she returned from jury duty once and acted like it didn't involve a guy who threw a potato at his landlord. True story. She picked up her coffee and said, I might stop by the co-op after work. They've got a new shipment of teas I want to check out. I nodded slowly. Tell Calvin I said hey. She paused for 1/4 of a second too long. Then, like clockwork, Calvin. You know, the guy who runs the place. Tall, skinny, looks like he built a canoe out of hemp. Cheryl took a sip and nodded, but her brain was sprinting. She hadn't expected me to be acquainted with Calvin, the avocado sock-wearing co-op wizard. She had a mental flowchart of my routines, and I just scribbled all over it. That night, she brought home a small bag of what she claimed were herbal detox blends. It still had the price sticker from a different store. Cheryl wasn't the kind of person who made mistakes like that. She once noticed the microwave clock was 3 minutes off and reset every appliance in the house to match her phone. So I kept going. I started making small changes in the house. I moved a framed picture in the hallway, just an inch to the left. I replaced the hand soap in the guest bathroom with a brand we never used. I reorganized the spice rack so that paprika was next to cinnamon. Within a week, Cheryl asked, did we always keep basil here? No idea, I said. Maybe the ghost moved it. She smiled in that way you do when your brain is glitching, but you're pretending you're fine. But the real fun came when I created the survey. This was my piece de resistance. I printed 10 copies of a fake feedback form from a fictional company called Domestic Harmony Solutions. The form asked questions like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the emotional transparency in your household? Which of the following best describes your primary emotional outlet? Circle 1. Shouting/journaling/cryptic Instagram posts/lying. Do you feel heard? Why/N? If not, explain in 25 words or fewer using only adverbs. I filled out 1 copy with obviously fake answers and left it on my desk. Cheryl saw it the next morning and said, what is this? Oh, just some research I'm helping with, I said. It's part of a long-term observational study. Observational? She asked, frowning. Yeah. They're studying the effects of long-term cohabitation on emotional architecture. She blinked. That's not a real phrase. Exactly, I said. Brilliant, right? She stared at the form. You wrote, emotional outlet. Elaborate sighing followed by tool organization. I shrugged. Accurate. She didn't laugh. Cheryl only laughs when other people make the joke. She stopped leaving her planner out after that. But she started over-explaining things. Which was exactly what I wanted. Suddenly, her Thursdays were full of names and times. Her Sunday afternoons were book club with people she barely liked. Her smile got tighter. Her voice got flatter. And her explanations got longer. I wasn't spying anymore. I didn't need to. Cheryl was unraveling all by herself, simply because I'd stopped accepting her version of events and started running a quiet little game of my own. And that's when I made my final adjustment. I moved the whiteboard from the garage to the kitchen. She saw it on a Thursday morning. It had only one line written in thick red marker. Ask Cheryl what Keith doesn't know. She stared at it for 10 full seconds, like it might start blinking. Then she turned to me. What is that supposed to mean? I shrugged, sipping coffee. You tell me. And that was the first time I saw Cheryl genuinely nervous. When you put a question like, ask Cheryl what Keith doesn't know, in red marker on a whiteboard next to the refrigerator, you get one of two responses. Option 1, silence, followed by a very intense cleaning of the fridge door. Option 2, a slow, creeping panic dressed up as casual indifference. Cheryl, ever the champion of overplanning, chose both. She didn't say a word at first. She just stood there with her coffee, holding the mug like it was suddenly giving her life advice. Then she slowly wiped a non-existent smudge off the countertop with a paper towel that didn't really need to exist. I didn't rush her. I just grabbed the car keys and told her I was headed to the hardware store for furnace tape and a few extras. I made that up on the spot. We don't have a furnace that requires tape. But it sounded vague and manly, and Cheryl couldn't challenge it without admitting she didn't know anything about furnaces, tape, or me. By the time I got back an hour later, the whiteboard had been erased. Not just wiped, scrubbed. Like she thought the ghost of the sentence might haunt the kitchen if she didn't fully remove every trace. The only thing left on it was a smiley face in blue marker. A cheerful little hostage emoji. She said nothing, and I said even less. Because that's how you get answers from Cheryl. Not by shouting, not by asking. By handing her a loaded silence and letting her decide if it's going to explode. The next 2 days were quiet, even by our standards. She started suggesting things. Game night. A walk through that park she always forgets exists. A YouTube documentary about wellness retreats in Vermont. She even complimented my haircut, which is hilarious considering I've been cutting it myself with a number 3 guard since 2012. And then came the accidental mention. It happened in the laundry room. I was folding towels. Cheryl walked in holding her phone in that way people do when they want to look like they weren't just using it to check the weather in Belize. Oh, she said, pretending surprise. Dale texted. He wants to know if we're still on for helping with the garden project this weekend. There it was. A mention so forced it could have been a stage direction. I looked up slowly. The garden project? She blinked twice, fast. Yeah, for the community lot downtown. He's coordinating the, planting. Of what? She opened her mouth, closed it, then said, lavender. Oh, I nodded. Of course. Classic downtown lavender project. She pretended to get a call, which was bold considering the phone was still locked. She walked off to the bedroom with the urgency of someone who just realized they left a candle burning near a curtain, and I resumed towel folding like it was my life's calling. That weekend, I let her go to her lavender commitment. I didn't even flinch when she left in a denim jacket she hadn't worn since the time she met Dale for coffee number 2. I just sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and pulled up a blank document titled, The Retirement of Cheryl. This wasn't going to be a dramatic blow-up. No declarations. No guilt-laced pleas for honesty. Cheryl wasn't built for directness, and frankly, neither was I. Not anymore. What I wanted was an exit strategy that felt less like a breakup and more like a company restructuring. I was firing Cheryl, with full benefits, and a 2-week notice. But I wasn't quite done yet. I needed a finale. So I reached out to one of the few mutual friends Cheryl and I still tolerated. Aubrey, who ran the local ceramic studio and was, in her words, always up for light sabotage if the cause is noble. Aubrey owed me a favor after I rewired the lighting in her workshop 2 summers ago and didn't charge her, even after I electrocuted myself just enough to forget how long Bohemian Rhapsody is. I gave her a task, host a couples evening class. Invite Cheryl. Say it's part of a new Creative Therapy for Connected Partners initiative. She'd eat that up like a gluten-free motivational quote. Aubrey sent the invitation to Cheryl's email the next day. Cheryl mentioned it that evening over dinner as if it had just materialized out of the spiritual ether. I got a note from Aubrey, she said, sipping her tea like it contained a truth serum. She's doing this new thing. Couples pottery. She thinks we should come. I raised an eyebrow. Pottery? Yeah. For, communication and bonding. You sculpt something together, and she guides you through your emotional, Shapes. Emotional shapes. She nodded, confident in the nonsense. Sounds abstract, I said. It's very modern, she offered, as if that explained anything. So I agreed, because this was the stage I'd been waiting for. The class was on a Wednesday night. A chilly one. We showed up and were handed matching aprons like we were being initiated into a friendly, clay-based cult. Aubrey greeted us with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been dying to watch this particular soap opera episode in real time. We sat at a wheel, side by side, while the other couples chatted in gentle tones about trust and creative synergy. Cheryl acted like she was in an actual therapy session, nodding thoughtfully, using phrases like core alignment and mutual sculpting goals. Then Aubrey asked us to mold an object that symbolizes your current relationship. I made a box. Straight edges. Closed. Sturdy. Emotionally vacant. Like a safe where nothing valuable is stored anymore. Cheryl made a swan. Or, more accurately, what she said was a swan. It looked like a ladle having an identity crisis, but I didn't argue. Then Aubrey did something unexpected. She asked us to trade sculptures. Now, she said, finish each other's work. Cheryl stared at my box. I stared at her ladle swan. And for the first time in years, we were both speechless. Because no matter what she tried to do with it, shape it, soften it, make it meaningful, my box stayed a box. And no matter what I added to her sculpture, detail, structure, adjustment, it still looked like something that belonged in a drawer, not on a pedestal. After class, Aubrey gave me a wink that said, "You owe me another light fixture." We drove home in silence. The next morning, Cheryl suggested we repaint the guest room. I said, sure. Let's go with something neutral. Neutral. The perfect word to end things on. Because that weekend, I was going to roll out phase 2. Not revenge. Not a confrontation. Just a well-organized, fully laminated exit. One that Cheryl wouldn't see coming until the final signature. Planning a strategic exit from your own marriage is sort of like planning a low-budget office move. Everything looks straightforward until you realize half the boxes are full of broken things you forgot you owned, and the other half are labeled Keith's fault in Sharpie. But I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't interested in a public spectacle or some dramatic announcement that would have made Cheryl cry into her color-coded planner. I just wanted out. Quietly, neatly, and with the satisfaction of knowing I'd packed every box myself, emotionally speaking, of course. Cheryl had just finished measuring swatches for the neutral guest room redo she'd come up with as a way to avoid processing anything. She was in her nesting phase, minus the baby, hope, or general sense of love. I played along like a champ. I even held paint chips against the wall and muttered things like, "Moss beige is more ambitious than almond, don't you think?" She nodded like I was speaking French. She didn't care. She just needed us to keep moving in circles so the dizziness would cover up the cracks. That same week, I took a few hours off work and went to see someone who wasn't a therapist, lawyer, or yoga instructor. His name was Danny Mullins. We'd gone to high school together, but he'd gone on to become a notary public with the enthusiasm of a man who once lost his shot at regional bowling fame and decided paperwork was a safer bet. I walked into his small office, which smelled faintly of toner and modest regret, and slid a folder across his desk. "I need some help making this real," I said. Danny opened the folder, glanced over the top page, and raised an eyebrow. "This is the spreadsheet." "Sure is," I said. "Detailed breakdown. Property, joint accounts, shared utilities. I've color-coded it for ease." "Keith," he said slowly, "you've done everything except sign your own divorce papers." "Good," I said. "That's step 8. I had a plan. Not an emotional plea, not a dramatic reveal. Just a sequence of boring steps with unshakable logic and quiet momentum. The same way Cheryl reorganized spice racks when she felt her life slipping. I was doing the same, just on a slightly larger scale. I created a 3-page document titled Cheryl Transition Packet. It included a breakdown of shared assets with proposed divisions, a schedule for moving out, should she prefer to stay in the house, instructions for transferring utilities, a guide for redirecting mail, and, because I'm nothing if not thorough, a QR code linked to a playlist called Songs for a Civil Separation, mostly filled with upbeat instrumentals and 0 lyrics. Just vibes. I printed 2 copies. One for Cheryl, one for me. I also included a post-it note that said, "No rush. Read when you're in the mood for some light admin." Delivery was scheduled for Sunday. But first, Saturday. On Saturday, Cheryl had plans. She didn't announce them the way she used to, brightly, with over-detailed explanations and over-explained reasons for things no one asked about. Now she just said, "I've got a thing," and walked out with a bag that probably had a copy of her alternate personality inside. Perfect. I took the opportunity to finish cleaning out the storage closet in the garage. It had been our closet once, full of seasonal decorations, board games we hadn't opened in 4 years, and the yoga mat I got her one Christmas because I was out of ideas and the store was closing. In that closet, I found an envelope. Nothing dramatic. No lipstick kisses, no cryptic notes. Just a plain envelope with the name Dale, written in lowercase letters like she was whispering to herself. I opened it. Inside were printed emails. Actual, printed out emails. Now, I don't know who's still printing emails in 2025, but apparently Cheryl is a one-woman preservation society. I skimmed them. There was nothing steamy, nothing explicit. Just lines like, "Can't wait to see you again," and "Being around you makes me feel like I remember who I am." Which was funny, because being around her lately made me feel like a retired appliance. I didn't react. I didn't storm into the backyard and ask the tulips if they'd seen Dale recently. I just slipped the envelope back where I found it and walked inside to prep the packet. The next morning, over coffee, I slid the folder across the table. She looked at it, then looked at me. "What's this?" "Instructions," I said. "For what?" "For the rest of the year. Give or take." She didn't open it right away. Cheryl doesn't like surprises. I knew that. That's why I didn't include any. I stood up. "Take your time. I'll be at the storage unit." Thought I'd start clearing space. "You're leaving?" she asked, as if she wasn't already halfway to emotional singlehood. "No, Cheryl. I'm decluttering. It's what we do now, remember? You start with what doesn't bring joy." That got a reaction. Not much, but enough. A twitch of the mouth, a tightening of the grip on the coffee mug. Later that day, she followed me to the garage, clipboard in hand. "I've reviewed the packet," she said. "Great. Any questions?" "A few." "Hit me." She started down the list. Joint bank accounts. Her car title, what would happen with the house if we both wanted to sell. I answered each one like I was giving a PowerPoint to a disinterested boardroom. Then she paused. "You've really thought this through." I had a lot of quiet mornings. She nodded slowly. "So that's it?" "No, Cheryl. That's the plan. The it part is up to you." She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just stood there, looking at the clipboard like it had turned into a life she didn't recognize. "Do you hate me?" she asked finally. "No," I said. "I just stopped thinking I owed you another round of pretending." She blinked a few times, as if trying to keep dust out of her eyes. "Keith, don't," I said gently. "You'll want to spin it. Just don't." We didn't talk much after that. I gave her the time she needed to decide which parts of the packet she wanted to contest, if any. I wasn't in a rush. The truth was, I felt better than I had in months. Because the moment I put that packet on the table, I stopped being a side character in Cheryl's quiet soap opera and started being Keith again. The last conversation didn't come with violins or long pauses or tears soaking into throw pillows. It came with a clipboard, because that's the kind of marriage we had, one that ended with administrative supplies. It was a Tuesday. She picked Tuesday, which made sense. Cheryl's emotional timing had all the drama of a DMV renewal notice. I was in the garage, sorting things into boxes labeled Keep, Donate, and Miscellaneous, which is short for I don't know what this is, and it might be cursed. She came in holding the clipboard from the transition packet, like it was a project she'd been reluctantly assigned in a group she didn't choose. "I went through everything," she said, standing just inside the doorway like the garage was covered in invisible emotional tripwires. "Good," I said, taping up a box of mismatched extension cords. Clear instructions are important. People get lost without them. She ignored that, or maybe absorbed it like a vitamin she didn't want but knew she needed. Cheryl didn't do confrontations. She did checklists. So I knew if she was holding that clipboard, she wasn't here to fight. She was here to finalize. "I have a few comments," she said, flipping to the second page like she was giving feedback on a community newsletter. "Of course you do." She looked up. "I just want this to be respectful. That's what the playlist is for." I didn't listen to the playlist. "Your loss." Track 4 really captures our whole vibe. Cheryl took a breath through her nose the way she does when she's about to ignore something sarcastic. She had a high tolerance, probably from years of living with me, though clearly not quite high enough to build a life on. She gestured to the page. I think the timeline for moving out is a little fast. You're welcome to stay in the house. I'll go. I already found a short-term lease near the recycling center. The recycling center? Yeah, nice place. Very sorted. She blinked. You're serious? I shrugged. It's clean. The neighbors keep to themselves. And I get a discount because the landlord is my mechanic's cousin's ex-wife. That sounds stable. It's no pottery class, but I'll survive. We stood there for a minute, neither of us saying what we were supposed to say. Cheryl probably expected a parting speech. Some sad, nostalgic monologue about the life we built and the dreams we deferred and the mattress we picked out together that neither of us liked. But I wasn't interested in reruns. So, she said, flipping the page, you're really going through with this? No, Cheryl. I made a binder because I was bored. She gave me the look she usually saved for when I refused to buy matching towels. I just mean it's final. It's been final, I said. You just didn't have a calendar reminder for it. She was quiet after that, probably trying to find the right way to ask the question that had been on her mind since I slid that folder across the table. Why aren't you angrier? Here's the thing. There was a time when I would have been. When I would have pulled out every tired argument about loyalty and promises and expectations. But that Keith died somewhere between Dale's Garden Insights and Cheryl's fourth fake co-op visit. The new Keith? He was just tired of reruns. She sat down on the edge of the folding table I was using as a workbench. I never meant for it to get this far. Then you should have used a shorter measuring stick. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You know I didn't do this to hurt you. Of course not. You did it to find yourself. Somewhere between yoga and urban garden synergy. That's not fair. Neither was putting up with book club night when I knew half those people couldn't read. That one hit her. Not hard. Just enough to make her shift in her seat. You never said anything, she said. You never asked. We sat in silence again. Cheryl had this idea that our problem was a lack of communication. What she never got was that silence wasn't the absence of words. It was the result of being talked over for so long. You just stopped replying. I do care about you, she said finally. I know. You just care about Dale more. That's not true. Then why are you defending him like he's on trial? I'm not. You are. And you've been doing it since Lavender got involved. She didn't have a response for that. Instead, she stood up, adjusted her shirt like she was straightening her dignity, and said, I'll sign the documents tonight. I left a pen on the kitchen counter. It's color-coded. Blue for clarity. She nodded once, walked toward the door, then stopped. Do you think we could have fixed it? I didn't look at her. I just kept sorting wires. We didn't try to fix it, Cheryl. We tried to hide it behind new curtains. There was nothing left to say after that. She walked back inside, and I sat there for a while, holding a tangle of cords that perfectly matched the last 5 years of my life. Later that night, I packed the last box of my things. Just clothes, some tools, a stack of old receipts I couldn't throw away for reasons I no longer remembered. I left the whiteboard. I figured Cheryl would need something to fill the silence with. Before I walked out, I took one last glance around. Not for nostalgia, just to check for socks I might have missed. And on the kitchen counter, next to the blue pen, was the signed packet. Every page, with a sticky note that said, I hope your next checklist is shorter. Fair enough. I didn't leave a note. I just left the playlist playing. Cheryl would hear track 4 eventually. The one that sounded exactly like nothing. And that was the right ending. No drama. No confessions. Just a quiet exit through the garage with the dignity of a man who finally realized he didn't need to win the argument. Just leave the room. The end. Subscribe to the channel